Welcome to Stream B, the morning session, day 2 of the Australex 2021 online conference. We are joined today by Jennifer. The title of the paper is Creating a Dictionary of Dissent and Protest. Talofa lava whatalofa tūlau sasunga Jennifer. Ia manuia lau whasoa. I will now hand you over to Jennifer to present her paper. Jennifer.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Is the clock going to start, or do I have to press it or something? Anyway, thank you everyone for coming to my presentation. This is fairly sort of simple. I'm not going into a lot of theory or anything, but just give you some ideas, and this is very hypothetical. Actually, I'm recycling this presentation for a few years ago. My background is like as a research assistant in bilingual dictionaries in Hong Kong, although I've got my university affiliation is Hong Kong University, although this has got nothing to do with them. This is sort of relating to my PhD project, which was discourse analysis of the discourse of democratization in post-handover Hong Kong, and combination of my interest in dictionaries and a visit to London's Victoria and Albert Museum a few years ago, where they had an exhibition called Disobedient Objects. I have presented at Asia Lex before. I'm really interested in kind of odd kind of dictionary work, and I did a presentation once on creating meaning and in a fictional dictionary. So I'm interested in writers who use dictionaries in a fictional form, and there's been a few examples of that, and analysing them in a pragmatic way. I've been in Hong Kong 23 years, actually nearly 24 years, and I came just after the handover in October 97, and so I've been documenting through my interest of the changes. And Occupy Central happened in 2014, and it lasted for about from October to end of sort of late September to mid-December 2014. And I've just got in my first slide is just the a picture from the web page of Occupy Central with Love and Peace website, and a picture underneath taken by me when the movement first started. So basically, I'm just going to talk about my ideas about the dictionary and give you examples and some possibilities for something for the protests of 2019. In the Victoria and Albert Museum in 2015, they had an exhibition called Disobedient Objects. I came, I think, just at the end of it, so I had to buy the catalogue, but I was sort of intrigued. And they still have a room dealing with objects that are protests, like homeless spikes in UK and other things. And they had them displayed something like the picture here, but you know, they're all sort of jumbled together, and you really need context when you're discussing things like a movement for dissent or a movement for protest. But this sort of gave me an idea of doing a kind of, if I was doing a hypothetical dictionary of a protest movement over time, you'd have to have a movement that not just a one-day movement. You'd have to have a sort of several months or even year movement to do this. Yeah, so I'll move on to the next slide. Yeah, so of course, there's be problems and potential methodologies of compiling such a dictionary, or really it's probably encyclopedia, because political acts generate kind of a lot of diverse multimodal array of physical, spatial, and graphic inventions that often practically and succinctly and emotionally reach out to participants and observers. That's why you have to have a lot of context to talk about them. So the objects that people use in protest can be mundane objects, repurposed, banners, found objects, pamphlets, you know, of course, handouts, objects, texts. They take an additional sense when than more commonplace usages, and often they have a memory in the people's consciousness, and these could change over time as well. And of course, such a dictionary or encyclopedia would have to be multimodal. You can't really do it as a print thing if you want to get all the information. I mean, you could do an adapted one, I suppose. And so I thought that this movement of 2014 would be an excellent way to illustrate this. So I've just got some objects there. You know, it was quite a community newspaper. Down here is like it says Democracy Classroom, and people put something over a sign called True Democracy, and students set up study classrooms. Actually, it was interesting because there was kind of communities set up in main locations. This was the main one in Harcourt Road, Admiralty. And, you know, as I said, there were classrooms, there were people setting up tents if you wanted to if you were feeling disturbed about goings on. There were prayer areas and all kinds of things. It was a real community. Oops. And what was interesting that towards the end of the time, the occupied sites, there was maps produced of the area. There were other areas apart from this one, but this was the main area in Admiralty. And so actually this really helped for me to think about how to compile such a hypothetical dictionary. And of course, objects move in protest. They don't always stay stationary, but there were several things that stayed stationary, like there were little gardens set up, certain installations were there, as I said, the prayer stations or first aid tent or activity tents were placed in various areas around the thing. And this was a poster, but there was also one written on the pavement in chalk. Now, this is actually what I would consider my homepage for this online dictionary of a protest. And just a little word about meaning. I mean, the central notion of dictionaries is meaning, or kind of defining meaning, in the linguistic sense of in a linguistic sense, non-linguistic cultural correlate, reference, or denotation of a linguistic form. In a purely textual dictionary, meaning is assigned a sense according to a particular linguistic context. So meaning in a dictionary of dissent and protest is assigned to a particular social, cultural, and political context of situation, and they relate to sort of the cultural norms, political situation, ideology here. And my background is in critical discourse analysis, so for me, documenting the history of like a word even is really important. So you would have to kind of define the side of an object, define the object, and put it in the context, a wider socio-political context. When I was doing my presentation, my work on creating meaning in a fictional dictionary, this fictional dictionary consisted of vignettes, little kind of mini stories where a person was, an actual person was defined, or a situation was defined, or a person was defined, like in a learner's dictionary where you give example sentences. So in this fictional dictionary, they had they defined a term and gave a little story about it. So the story was equivalent to an example sentence, and in some ways that's a little bit like this one. In Occupy Central, which is also known as the umbrella movement for obvious reasons, and so often big movements like this has a particular symbol that symbolizes the whole thing, or icon, and this was the umbrella, in particular yellow umbrellas. So I just had a brief thing about just a very brief description of the movement. Actually, the movement, although started in late September 2014, actually kind of had its origins in January 2013, when the guy, Benny Tai, who thought it up, had various actions, deliberations, meetings, and if these weren't satisfactory, a civil disobedience movement would come into play. Unfortunately, good old Benny is now in jail. Anyway, so I put on the front page kind of some areas of the protest zones, Admiralty, Causeway Bay, and there was a few others, but the main one was Admiralty on Hong Kong. Actually, yeah, actually that's Kowloon, but actually the main site was here, really. So this is a picture that I showed you before, and a little, I mean, I don't have any hyperlinks here, but just to give you an example, like I'm probably in this section write about how the dictionary came into being, and my involvement, because I was following this movement very closely. I took a lot of pictures. I was there quite a few times every week. And of course, background to the protest, chronology of various happenings, major categories, and alphabetical listings, which we'll look through now. Sorry. Okay, so first of all, the iconography, the yellow ribbon and the crossed yellow ribbon. Now, I never actually find out why yellow was the yellow was the main color. I mean, I know there was an old song once, tie a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree. I don't know if that is relevant, but I've never really heard a good explanation about why the color yellow. And umbrellas, because as a picture there was from a Time magazine, umbrellas were used against tear gas. And I mean, Hong Kong people carry umbrellas all the time because it rains in summer, and it's a protection from shade. And I thought also too that I would have a meaning of the item. And also I'd have lots of links, like stories related to the use of the umbrella, maybe some social media links. Okay, I keep pressing like it's a normal PPT. And I would show a couple of maybe sort of different variations on the use of umbrellas around the site. There were many, many more than this, but just an example. I wouldn't need to explain this. I don't think I would put them on a map or anything, because these were quite movable objects. Okay, this is just an example of how I would decided in major categories like banners, building displays, caricatures, all kinds of things like this. Repurposed objects is, I mean, I probably could do more, but also you would need, like in any, well, this would be kind of a special dictionary where you have major categories, but also you would need like an alphabetical categorization. I couldn't think of what to put for E or K. There might be something after I thought about it. I put like activities, barricades, everything I could think of related to that letter. So you could see that there's quite a lot of different activities, textual objects and repurposed objects, and I'm going to go through a few now because I think it's really interesting to see how I have the actual entries. This is just, I'm just going through the alphabet here. Yeah, I didn't put X and Z. I've got a few there. This is an example of an installation, and the umbrella man made out of wood. I put where the location is. If this was a real dictionary, I'd probably put this, because this was fairly stationary object, I put where it would be located. And I just put the meaning here and who made it, and do kind of like a interdiscursive, so not interdiscursive, intertextual reference to the goddess of democracy that was set up in Tiananmen Square in 1989, June the 4th. And actually in Hong Kong, a lot of the universities have statues mimicking the goddess of democracy. So I've got a link to there, and I could have photos to these, and also maybe relevance to Tiananmen Square. Interesting enough that there's, in the 2019 protests, there was sort of a similar thing called Lady Liberty, who was set in various locations, and you could sort of give a intertextual reference. So the Lenin Wall is something that happened in 2014. Oops, what's happened there? Near the central government office on the wall, post-it notes. And you can have a link to the Lenin Wall in Prague, which I never knew there was a Lenin Wall until Hong Kong had its Lenin Wall. And you could put articles linked to it, and some close to link to other notes. This is the one I put up, and I actually signed my name. In 2019, I kind of was trying to classify the messages on the Lenin Wall. And actually this is a link to 2019, because they had sort of another Lenin Wall, and they also had mobile Lenin walls on people, stuck on people. And this is like a digital display called Stand By You Add Oil Machine, projected on the side where the Lenin Wall. And this is interesting because it links people with the global protest, the global solidarity, and from all over the world. They're projected on the building. Yeah, so there's actually, I've got a YouTube of these messages coming up. Yeah, I don't always have Chinese there, but maybe I should. Because digital art and digital things will become more and more prominent. And also this is like an entry for tents, because people were occupied tents. I didn't actually ever occupy a tent myself. I had an offer, but I never did, unfortunately. So that's the meaning is, of course, I suppose it's linked to previous Occupy kind of movements. Yeah, don't think I can really say a lot about that. And people were really concerned about safety, you know, like actually I felt never more safe than walking through protests in Hong Kong, and people would give you food, they would give you towels and bottles of water and everything. But also lots of articles, and you'd need to kind of check to see whether these articles or the links are still working, because I've been writing a book myself lately, and I've had to check on old references for websites. So that's the only trouble with linkages on dictionaries. And also there was installations on the famous iconic Lion Rock, where they put I want real universal suffrage in Chinese. And also they did a little installation in one of the Admiralty sites. I think it's, I don't know, fiberglass or paper mache or something with the same thing. You know, some sort of people would come later on and take it down, but it would go up again. And there is a video of this somewhere. So the fact that Hong Kong has got an interesting relationship with space. So space can be at a premium. So and there's lots of barriers about where you can stand and where you can go. So this is sort of subversion of space. Banners. Actually, this was near, well, government headquarters. I can't find a picture that I had. What's this doing? I don't know why it's doing. Where this fence has been erected around the Legislative Council building, government complex. They had a little sign saying Berlin Wall. So again, linkage to the global movement. And here's a quotation from George Orwell's Animal Farm, refers to some groups that represent Hong Kong from functional constituencies, which are special interest group, and certain people can elect them. It's a bit complicated, Hong Kong system. But anyway, but basically, I mean, even before 2020, when the national security law, it wasn't quite very. It was still kind of problematic, but of course, it's more problematic now. And also, I've got links to other banners, like referencing John Lennon and "Can You Hear the People Sing" from Les Mis, the musical. It was sung a lot, especially during 2014, not so much during 2019. For example, you could have like musical audio. People would sing happy, if they've got like the people that were opposite the protesters, they would sing "Happy Birthday" loudly just to kind of annoy them. And there are other songs like Rihanna, Umbrella by Rihanna. And actually, I shouldn't mention this, but people will, if you're, you would say, "Oh, here's yellow" or "here's blue," meaning yellow for the protesters and blue for the non-protesters or the police. Yeah, and you could actually give some more theoretical linkage to about the use of songs in protests more generally, I suppose. And also, for example, there are created characters. So you wouldn't really, I didn't have a location of this. This also could be online. Sometimes, especially to 2019, there could be protests, posters that were on banners and posters that you can find online. So they had sort of a double duty. And people made characters up, like this means hand and this means umbrella. So together means kind of raise the umbrella. This is interesting, a real Hong Kong way of doing things, like the chief executive gets elected by this electoral committee, and at this time CY Leung was elected by 689 out of 12,000 people. So he was known as Mr. 689, and you have to know Cantonese or things, not that my Cantonese is great or anything, that sometimes these can have kind of further meanings, like 689 can sound like no fucking use, and also it can be 689 like June 1989 in reference to Beijing, and there's a link to a blog like that, and yeah. So that's sort of an interesting use of numbers and a reference to the Hong Kong system. That's why you really need history when you analyze texts or meaning in a any kind of dictionary, really. So just a bit about like the 2019. It wasn't a fixed kind of protest like 2014 Occupy. It was more fluid, and Be Water seemed to be the strategy. Although it lasted longer, about nearly 6 months. And this is a quotation from martial arts icon Bruce Lee about being shapeless like water. And if you were following the 2019 protests, which I did quite thoroughly, it just meant that the protests were all over Hong Kong, in different areas of Hong Kong, of a very, very diverse nature. They had, this was on, they had schedules online and also on protest or banners and railings and everything like that. And they had, you can't really read that here, but they had really quite creative names, and protests were kind of reoccurring and one-off. Like, for example, big, huge marches like this one on 1st of October. So I'm actually have a chapter like this in a book that I'm finishing now. So major rallies, which are single event, sector rallies, like they had like what they call the silver-haired rally from elderly and middle-aged, although if you don't actually have to be middle-aged or elderly to go in the silver-haired protests, but many people did. The recurring events were something like people gathering in shopping malls and singing a song that now could get you in jail, but I'm going to say it anyway, called Glory to Hong Kong. And flash mobs where people would maybe do the same thing, or like stand on city streets during lunch hour, shouting at the riot cops up on the opposite side of the road. So, you know, you'd have categories talking about the different rallies, different sectors, the big mass marches. In Occupy, they didn't have a big mass march. It was just stationary. So you can't really have a map. You'd have to you could get a probably map and with like where you can click on, you know, this happened over here, this happened over here, this happened over here. And there are also linen walls and tunnels. So this is sort of an example from, it's not a very good thing because I was a bit of a rush to finish. A linen tunnel, which is actually a bus interchange subway system, which is near where I live. You can't see this because it's too small. In Chinese it says typo linen tunnel, and they had all kinds of messages. For example, when's the next protest, things, what's happening, you know, Hong Kong add oil, or that kind of thing, solidarity slogans, what to do if you get hit by tear gas, all these kind of different categories of messages. And so you could have a thing about the linen walls, which were stationary, like the linen tunnels, the linen walls all over Hong Kong, but also they had mobile linen walls with post-it notes stuck on people. And another feature of 2019 was kind of keeping narrative of events where people would, it's too small, but it's also about like an incident that happened in the mass transit railway system. Certain things happened, like they were actually helpful of protesters at the beginning, and then when they were criticized by Beijing and other people, they basically, the police were using the MTR as kind of their kind of office in a way, and closing off entrances. So people wanted to protesters wanted to kind of control the narrative of events. So there was often chronologies of what the police did and so on. And also there were incidents that affect how the discourse of the protests were going on. This was in August 2019, where I think she was a first aider. She got hit in the eye with what we call a bean bag round, which I never heard of until the protest. It's some kind of funny thing, round thing that the police can shoot out of a funny gun, and hit her in the eye. And so there was sort of a mass movement where people covered their kind of eye and took pictures and put it on social media, which became a global phenomenon. And also another related, and this saw lots of posters like this, but also I've got a picture of an eye chart where they use Chinese characters to explain, you know, that, you know, the government only sees things in black and white. It's not, or you know, not seeing the situation properly. And on walls and things like this on the ground, they often actually put dates like the 21st of June, 31st of August, and the 1st of October. This was where some protesters were bashed up by triads in part of New Territories. This was when someone got shot by police, sort of a couple of days ago, anniversary. And then this was a 1st of October protest where I forget actually what happened. Anyway, but also there was lots of posters detailing, you know, like how many rubber bullets were shot, how many this, how many, I don't know what this was, tear gas canisters. And of course, the police would put out their own kind of versions as well. So there was like a discursive game between the different protesters. And also you could look about terminology. I did write a blog for Oxford University Press about terminology for the Occupy movement. Um, um, there's room to do more of terminology like people and expression in Hong Kong because the tear gas was everywhere. So everyone, even if you weren't protesting, you'd get tear gas at some point. We used to call, when the mass throwing of tear gas, called a tear gas buffet. And Hong Kong people like their buffets. So maybe I'd like to develop this, but of course I can't really publicize it much in Hong Kong because it's very, people are really afraid to say things about protests. Anyway, that's all what I'm talking about today. I'll just go back to the beginning. Yeah, but I'm interested in kind of alternate kind of dictionaries, and even I am finishing off a book manuscript on the discourse of Hong Kong politics from 2007 till now, but it's getting published in the US. I'm finalizing that now, and that's it. Thank you.
Many thanks for sharing, Jennifer. We still have a wee bit of time for questions to come through. I'm not sure, Jennifer, if you can see the questions. There has been a comment in there. Maybe perhaps you want to comment on that about...
Yes, I've just sent from Tanya, and she's thanking me for it, and she's given me an idea of a book, post-colonial studies, the key concepts. Yeah. Yeah, Hong Kong is interesting because it's sort of, it was decolonized from Britain, but it was decolonized without independence, and Britain actually gave independence to its colonies, but it didn't in Hong Kong. Yeah, I can't see any other questions.
Okay.
Only that
just
comment.
That comment
Yep.
about it, and appealing to the different ages and cultures.
Yes, no, it's certainly a very interesting to see how all you need history and you need to show all the interconnections. You know, you have to kind of, for example, in the 2019, people were carrying around Pepe the Frog. I don't know if you know Pepe the Frog, green frog, and in the US, it was sort of anti I don't know, white supremacists or the far right people or something used that as an icon, but in Hong Kong it was a sign of, it had a different meaning. So a protest object in one place would have a different meaning. It could have a different meaning culturally in another place, and so on. Will you be publishing your work, and how will you have access to this original discussion? I don't know what you mean by original discussion. I'd like to do something more with this, but you know, all this is just my free work. I don't ever get paid for this. People get confused because I work for different universities and it's not really related to that at all. But yeah, I'd like to do more. I just wish I could have funding to have a year off and do it, and I think I can't really. I have to be really careful with my mouth because Hong Kong is they've actually they actually charged this, actually the Speech Therapist Association, they put a picture book out. Actually, unfortunately, I think their problem was they put a preface explaining things a little bit too clearly, but if they didn't do the preface, it would be fine, about sheep and wolves, and it was actually a reference to protests. And so even that is like being accused of inciting anti-government hatred. So you have to be very careful, and there's no way you could publish this in Hong Kong now. But anyway, my book is will be anyway, American. Anyway, but I kind of want to do more work on this, but I just have to be careful about who I talk to about it in Hong Kong.
Great. Many thanks for sharing, Jennifer. Whaftaitele lava mo le whasoa. I will now thank you very much for sharing. We do not have a second presenter for this session, but for those who want to join the stream A for the second paper, you can just go through your program and click on that, and you can shift over to that. Otherwise, we're back here in stream B in the afternoon after the keynote speaker at 1 o'clock. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining.